He has welcomed news about the widening of the investigation into Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor.
A stunning development in Great Britain. Former Prince Andrew arrested.
Was described as a calamity likened to a car crash.
Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor is back at the royal residence on Sandringham Estate this morning.
Did you watch the interview? Absolute car crash.
Time to talk about Mr.
Yes, we need to discuss the former Prince Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, as he now is.
Andrew has been detained on suspicion of misconduct amid the growing uproar.
And I think King Charles is obviously very aware of this. He couldn't really expect anything else.
A lot of words there, but what that essentially means is that this is the very early stages.
And the only thing he can do at the moment is keep his head down. He can't exactly go off to the Middle East.
Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, has lost the latest stage of his court battle.
The issue, once again, is Harry's security protection when he's back in his home country.
His return is being overshadowed by the row over his security.
A British judge has ruled against Prince Harry and his appeal to reinstate security for himself and his family.
Nobody truly wants to pay anything for the return of the ex-royals.
Do you think he'll be looking over his shoulder at the moment as the Prince Andrew crisis grows?
Launch legal action against the Home Office over their decision to deny him automatic police protection.
Spokesman for the Duke says he is exploring every available option to make the trip happen safely.
He says his father, King Charles, will not speak to him because of this very public disagreement.
Does he get the armed security that he says he needs? What about if he's on a private visit? Is he worried?
Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor couldn't get any worse. It does. It does. It really does.
Prince Harry lost his security within weeks. His uncle didn't lose his for years. Not months. Years. Across a scandal, a lawsuit, and a settlement. All while Andrew remained inside the family's protective structure without anyone formally reviewing whether he still belonged there. The Queen never announced a decision to keep him protected. She didn't have to. According to her own biographer, protecting Andrew was closer to an instinct than a choice she ever had to defend out loud. That gap sits at the center of Harry's 2023 memoir, Spare. And later, in a UK courtroom, at the center of a legal case he was willing to lose in public, rather than drop quietly. Andrew had been named in a civil lawsuit. That case was resolved through a settlement in 2022, and it isn't the story tonight. What is the story? While that lawsuit sat unresolved, nobody moved to take away Andrew's protection. Harry's was gone within a month of stepping back from royal duties. Same family, same institution. Two completely different outcomes. And the strangest part isn't even the outcome itself. It's that nobody in the family ever had to publicly justify the difference until Harry forced the question into a courtroom years later. If you want more deep dives like this, make sure to subscribe to Royal Archives. Here's where it actually starts. January 2020, Sandringham. The Queen called Charles and William in for a summit to settle what the press had already nicknamed Megxit. Harry and Meghan's decision to step back as working royals. The meeting took days, not months. That speed matters. Weeks later, Buckingham Palace confirmed Harry and Meghan would lose public funding for royal duties and stop using their HRH titles while working independently. They were later forced to disclose they'd arranged privately funded security for their move to America. After then, President Trump said the U.S. wouldn't cover their protection either. No government on either side of the Atlantic was picking up the bill. 2 years later, when Andrew's situation forced the family's hand, the response was slow, deliberate, drawn out over years. With Harry, the family moved fast. That's the contrast the whole story hangs on. Here is the case background, and it's short by design. In 2019, Andrew sat for a BBC Newsnight interview meant to address his connection to the American financier who had died in custody months earlier. The interview went badly enough that the palace suspended his public duties within days. A civil lawsuit followed from Virginia Giuffre. In February 2022, that case was resolved through a settlement. The terms weren't confirmed publicly in detail, and Andrew has always denied wrongdoing. That's the entire case. In institutional terms, a lawsuit existed It ended in a settlement. No verdict was ever reached. It never went to trial, which means no court ever ruled on the underlying allegations one way or the other. The case simply ended, and the family moved forward without a legal resolution either way. What matters for tonight isn't the lawsuit. It's what the family did, and didn't do, around it. Because here's the part that doesn't get discussed enough. Andrew's security was never part of that conversation. Not during the interview fallout. Not during the 2 years the lawsuit sat active. Not even after the settlement. Harry's security, on the other hand, was decided within weeks of Sandringham by a body called RAVEC, the Royal and VYP Executive Committee, which includes 2 representatives from the royal household, sitting alongside the Home Office and the Metropolitan Police. In February 2020, RAVEC ruled Harry would lose his automatic government-funded protection once he was based outside the UK. He'd be covered case by case, and only in Britain. This is where the family's fingerprints start showing. The Sandringham summit produced a resolution in days. Andrew's situation, once it became serious enough to force the family's hand 2 years later, took over 2 years to produce a formal response. The titles and patronages weren't withdrawn until January 2022, months before which the family said nothing official at all beyond suspending his public duties. Harry's legal team later pointed to exactly that difference in pace as part of their argument about how the family handled the 2 situations differently. Quickly resolved when a working royal chose to leave, slowly resolved when a blood relative's own conduct became the problem. Harry's legal team argued something specific in court, that RAVEC's decision wasn't as independent as it looked. 2 seats on that committee belonged to the royal household, sitting alongside the Home Office, the Cabinet Office, and the Metropolitan Police, a structure that mixes government security assessment with family representation in a way most people never learn exists. His lawyers claimed those 2 seats had been used to apply pressure during the Sandringham negotiations. Essentially, that the threat of losing security had been dangled to discourage Harry and Meghan from leaving in the first place. That's not gossip. That's a formal legal argument Harry's team made under oath starting in September 2021 when he opened a case against the Home Office. He wanted the courts to say what happened wasn't a clean procedural downgrade. He wanted them to say the family had shaped it. Part of the argument leaned on something called informed representations. The idea that Harry should have been consulted before the risk assessment changed, not informed after the fact. That's a standard fairness argument in British administrative law, the kind courts have upheld in other cases involving government bodies making decisions that affect a person's life directly. It gave Harry's case real legal weight, independent of how the public read the emotional side of the story. Compare that to Andrew. No committee reviewed his access to protection during the lawsuit years. No public argument was ever made that his security should follow the same case-by-case logic Harry was assigned. The Queen's 2022 decision, the one that actually did land on Andrew, stripped his military titles and royal patronages. It said nothing about his security detail. 2 men, 2 very different processes, and only one of them had his physical safety put through a formal review at all. Here's where it gets more complicated because Harry didn't win. Britain's High Court rejected his challenge in February 2024. Before that ruling, at a December 2023 hearing, Harry's lawyers had called the original decision unlawful and unfair and read into the record a witness statement in which Harry explained his own reasoning that the UK was central to his children's heritage, a place he wanted them to feel at home the same way they did in the US. The court wasn't swayed. The judge ruled RAVEC's process had been neither irrational nor unfair procedurally. Harry appealed. 2-day hearing, April 2025. The Court of Appeal dismissed that too in May 2025. Sir Geoffrey Voss, delivering the judgment, said Harry had effectively been stepping in and out of the cohort of protection. Inside it when his UK visits made the risk clear, outside it the rest of the time. He called RAVEC's reasoning understandable. Not just legal. Understandable. Voss went further, saying that even a fresh risk analysis would likely have only confirmed the threat levels already on file. The real dispute, in his view, was never about how dangerous Harry's situation actually was, but about how much appetite the government had for funding it once he'd chosen to live abroad. That word choice mattered. It wasn't a ruling that Harry was wrong to feel wronged. It was a ruling that the government hadn't broken any rules getting there. What the court never touched, because it was never asked to, was the comparison Harry kept making anyway. That's Harry making his case, in his own words, inside a courtroom, not a memoir chapter, written for sale. The court weighed the process. It never weighed whether stripping his security while leaving Andrew's untouched made any moral sense at all. That comparison lived entirely outside the legal question, because Andrew's security was never formally part of the case. It only ever showed up in Harry's own framing of what the outcome meant. And that's the deeper layer here. The family was applying two entirely different frameworks at the same time, without ever admitting it out loud. Harry's security was tied to working status. Leave the job, lose the funding. That was the official logic, clean and bureaucratic. Andrew's security was tied to nothing at all because nobody in the family or the government ever formally reclassified him. He kept his blood-tied status through the entire scandal, through the lawsuit, through the settlement. The rule for Harry was about employment. The rule for Andrew in practice was just proximity, and that proximity wasn't accidental. Royal biographer Robert Hardman has written that the Queen held what he called extreme compassion for Andrew specifically, describing him as one of the family's two spares, alongside Harry, whose roles were never as clearly defined as an heir's. That documented instinct is the closest thing to an explanation for why security was never even raised as a question, while titles and patronages were actively being stripped in the same period. The same mother who was willing to publicly cut her son's public role in January 2022 left the one thing that kept him physically safe completely alone. Government lawyers defending RAVEC later pushed back on one part of Harry's framing specifically. They argued the committee hadn't decided Harry should receive zero protection, only that he wouldn't receive it on the same standing basis as before. A fine distinction. It mattered enormously in court and barely at all to how the outcome actually felt from where Harry was sitting. Andrew's own trajectory makes the contrast sharper still. Even after losing most of his military titles in January 2022, he kept one. The honorary rank of Vice Admiral, awarded by the Navy on his 55th birthday in 2015 for another 3 years until the Ministry of Defense finally removed it in late 2025. Harry lost his entire security arrangement in a matter of weeks. Andrew took the better part of a decade to lose the last of his honors. By 2024, that contrast had a nickname. The Times reported that royal courtiers privately called Harry and Andrew the Dukes of Hazard, grouping them together as the family's two problem cases, as if their situations were interchangeable. They weren't. One man served 10 years in the military and lost automatic protection within a month of leaving his post. The other stayed in a lawsuit for years and never had his protection reviewed at all. The nickname flattened a distinction Harry had spent a courtroom trying to make sharp. People magazine later quoted a source close to Harry, making the same point in blunter language after Andrew's 2026 arrest, that Harry had done his duty without incident and still ended up losing security and housing, while Andrew, despite everything, was protected for years. The insider called the whole situation sad and embarrassing for the entire family, adding that it left a mark on everyone connected to it. The fight didn't end with the 2025 loss either. In October 2025, Harry wrote directly to the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, asking for a fresh review. This after a stalker reportedly got close to him twice during a UK visit that September. By January 2026, RAVEC had opened a new risk assessment. Reporting at the time described insiders treating renewed protection for Harry as close to a formality. a striking reversal from the tone of the court defeats just months before. Buckingham Palace's public response to all of it stayed the same throughout. The matter had been examined repeatedly and meticulously by the courts, with the same conclusion reached on each occasion. That statement answers the legal question. It says nothing about the comparison Harry never stopped making. Now here's what happened to Andrew, because this is where the story's other half plays out. Later and differently. The Queen died in September 2022, 7 months after Andrew's settlement. Whatever protection his closeness to the family had bought him didn't survive her. In 2025, King Charles stripped his brother of the Duke of York title entirely and had him evicted from Royal Lodge, the Windsor home he'd kept even through the worst of the Newsnight fallout. Months later, the Ministry of Defense confirmed Andrew had also been reduced from his last honorary rank, Vice Admiral, down to Commander, retired. The standard rank for anyone who left regular Royal Naval Service on schedule. He'd served 22 years in the Navy, flown as a helicopter pilot during the Falklands War, and lost every trace of that record's honorary recognition within a few months of the Vice Admiral title going to. A defense spokesperson described the removal as coming after formal consideration, effective immediately, aligning Andrew's military status with the processes already used to strip his other styles and titles. What had taken almost 4 years to fully unwind, from the first titles lost in January 2022 to the last honorary rank gone in late 2025, happened to Harry's security arrangement in a single winter. Then, in 2026, Andrew, now known as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office, tied to his former role as UK trade envoy. The same proximity that had shielded him for years finally ran out, just not through the mechanism anyone expected. It wasn't a security review. It was his own brother, years later, deciding enough was enough. So here's where that leaves things. Harry lost his protection in a matter of weeks through a formal process, reviewed twice by British courts and upheld both times. Andrew kept his for years. Through an informal non-decision, nobody was ever forced to defend in a courtroom, and lost his standing eventually. But through titles and property, never through security, and it took nearly 4 years to strip everything he'd held. 2 entirely different tests, run on 2 entirely different clocks. One went through the courts and lost on paper, while making his point anyway. The other never had to answer the question at all, until his own brother decided it for him 3 years after their mother's death. The palace has never said these 2 decisions were connected. Harry has spent 5 years arguing they were never disconnected either. That the rule was always the same rule, just applied to 2 very different people in 2 very different ways on 2 very different timelines. Whether RAVEC's reasoning was really about status or about who still counted as close enough to protect without asking is the part no court has ever ruled on. Buckingham Palace's public line throughout has stayed the same. The matter was examined thoroughly by the courts, with the same result reached every time. That statement settles the legal question. It leaves the comparison Harry keeps making completely untouched. That question is still sitting there, unresolved, the same year Andrew's own reckoning finally caught up with him a different way entirely. And with RAVEC's fresh review of Harry's case still open as of early 2026, the next chapter of this particular comparison hasn't been written yet, which is exactly why it's worth watching where it goes.